Hello and welcome to the Daily Bread Bible Study. We are looking today at the entire book of Ruth, the chapters 1 through 4, for day 80, and this is for Friday, March 20th, 2020. So may we have good vision here, 2020, looking as we explore the book of Ruth. As we discussed in our Bible study on the book of Judges, God raises up strong leaders for times of uncertainty. And these leaders make choices. As we saw in the book of Judges, it often involved violence, and it had a short-lived and a regional impact. But the story of Ruth is something different. There's no violence to be found in this book. And we see that Ruth is also in the time of the book, or time of the Judges. That's the setting for this book. But we see how God is compassionate, or how God blesses those who are compassionate, loyal, and humble, all the characteristics that Ruth has, and Obed as well too. And we see how someone considered lowly gets elevated to a lasting position among nations. So let's dive into Ruth 1 to talk more about her story. We are introduced in the beginning of Ruth to some other characters whose names are puns and reflect important themes of what's happening in the story. Most notably, the first figure is named Elimelech, which is my God is king. Throughout this story, we will see how God is king, especially in the midst of adversity. Here in Ruth 1:1, it says, "In the days of the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, or Elimelech. That's probably the best way to pronounce it. And the name of his wife, Naomi. And the names of the 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion." It says, and continuing on, "But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And when they had lived about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. She's left with her 2 daughters-in-law. These widows are now vulnerable, and their role to be provided for by their husbands is over, so they now need a new role and a new plan and turn to God for help. Naomi decides to return to the land of Judah and tells her daughter-in-laws that to return to their parents' house. This brings a point about defining family. Is family something that is determined by flesh and blood, or is family that is something determined by spirit? In a lot of ways, we could see how they are both interconnected in this story of Ruth, and that both will be important in different ways. Now, for Orpah and Naomi, the flesh and blood connection motivates their decisions. Naomi is honoring her daughters-in-law and their families of origin, and she is absolving them from having to be her family, and wants them to live and have families of their own, even though she has lost hers in some sense. So both daughters hope for family. Orpah hopes to return to her family of origin, so that way she could find a husband potentially, and then have some descendants and children. But yet Ruth sees that her family is already in Naomi, and thus she clings to her. and is going to continue to create a family with Naomi, and they will be blessed through that. In some of the most refreshing words of the Bible, Ruth proclaims that Naomi is her family, saying in Ruth 1:15, so she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if death parts me from you." Even Ruth's vulnerability here, putting aside the question of how she will be accepted in Bethlehem, but Ruth chooses to make Naomi her family for good. Their futures are intertwined, and her physical presence will remain. This sounds a lot of echoes of what we've heard in the story of the development of Israel. Words that come to mind are promises God made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and many others, as could be shown through his conversation with Isaac, Genesis 26:3. "Reside in this land as an alien, and I will be with you, and will bless you." These are the words that God doesn't say directly to Ruth, but they apply. And the people of Bethlehem were surprised to see Naomi and see that she says to them, "Just call me Mara," which means bitter, "for the Lord has dealt harshly with me." So Naomi wants a name change from this lively and beautiful name of Naomi to this one bitter and disenlivened one named Mara. Now, moving to Ruth chapter 2, Naomi and Ruth come to Bethlehem as the harvest begins. Ruth goes out to glean the fields, as is permitted in the law of Moses, from Leviticus 19, which says, "When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field or gather the gleanings of the harvest. You shall not strip the vineyard bare or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God." This command is also very similar to another one in Leviticus 19. "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," which even Jesus, for us as Christians, sums up the whole law in that, along with Deuteronomy, that love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind. So, these sentiments are interconnected, is that the love for our neighbor should also look like the love for our Lord, and that we should take care of our neighbor and leave some for those who are in need. Thus, that will help the community feel like they have enough, to prevent them from hoarding, and empower those with very little to be taken care of by God and the hands of God's community. The field of the property of where she is gleaning belongs to a man named Boaz. And the man quickly takes concern for Ruth. It says in Ruth 2:5, "Then Boaz said to her servant, who is in charge of, to his servant who is in charge of the reapers, 'To whom does this young woman belong?'" Now, the whole women's ownership here is still present in this Bible story, but women are dealt with much more kindly. We hear that he learns that she is the one who acted in faith towards Naomi, and Boaz seeks to respond in a reciprocal kindness, essentially saying, "I will provide for you, Ruth." He invites Ruth to glean with his young women, both as a sign of generosity and as a form of protection, as Boaz states in 2:11-12, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and mother in your native land to come to a people that you did not know before. So may the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge. These kind and humble words continue. In Ruth 2:13, Ruth responds saying, "May I continue to find favor in your sight, my Lord, for you have comforted me and spoken kindly to your servant, even though I am not one of your servants." Boaz then provides a meal for Ruth and even instructs the laborers to leave a little extra for Ruth, so that way Ruth can gather it and collect it, and Ruth takes it back and shares it with Naomi so Naomi can eat. When Naomi hears about the story with Boaz, she says, "Blessed be he by the Lord, whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead." Naomi also said to her, "The man is a relative of ours, one of our nearest kin." Thus, in Ruth 3, we see this next of kin information really matters a lot. For in their society, the next of kin was required to provide offspring in circumstances of premature death. Now, I'm not sure how it applies as directly to individuals who were considered outsiders who had married in from other tribes like Moab, but it sounds like they're taking this obligation and commitment seriously, especially Boaz will. We discussed this obligation previously in our Daily Bread Bible study, focusing on Genesis 38 in day 11, on the dysfunction concerning Judah and Tamar. Just a reminder that Tamar, her next of kin, refused to provide her with offspring, and thus she devolved into pretending to be a harlot, coaxing her father Judah to come and sleep with her. In that way, through sleeping with her father, she provided a seed, for her lineage, and to provide the tribe of Judah with offspring, including Perez, and a lot of other offspring came from that. But we see that Tamar then is an ancestor of Boaz. So Boaz knows the story. He's mindful of it in the eyes of the person writing this. And so Boaz knows this. So when Ruth comes asking Boaz to fulfill his next of kin obligation, Boaz seeks, to yes, but also seeks help. Instead of seeking to be dysfunctional like his ancestors, Boaz acts faithfully towards Ruth. It says in Ruth 3:12, "But now, though it is true that I am a near kinsman, there is another kinsman more closely related than I. Remain this night there on the threshing floor where she came to meet him, and in the morning I will act as your next of kin for you." If he will act as your next of kin for you, good, let him do. If he is not willing to act as your next of kin, then as the Lord lives, I will act as next of kin for you. So this whole, sleeping with her and providing her with offspring, Boaz, he says that he will do. We see Boaz provides then even more food for Naomi and Ruth, and sets out to find and talk with the actual nearest of kin. This person narratively happens to be right close by, and the conversation then ensues about Naomi wanting to sell off her land, which the next of kin is very interested in and would like to buy the land. But Boaz also mentions, there's another challenge too. It's not as simple that you would have to also take in the Moabite and take in this Moabite named Ruth. And remember, during the time of Judges, the Moabites are not very well liked. there in the tribe of Israel. They are not well received. The Moabites were thought to be enemies. And so Ruth, being an outsider and from this enemy territory, this guy is thinking, well, it would mess up my inheritance, as it says in Ruth 4:6. So take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. And the narrative makes a side note here, similar to the way in which I explain helpful information that I deem helpful. It says in Ruth 4:7, now this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging to confirm a transaction. Now the one took off a sandal and gave it to the other. This was the manner of attesting in Israel. So Boaz and this next of kin do the sandal swap, and then Boaz proclaims his actions are, quote unquote, in verse 10, in order that the name of the dead may not be cut off from his kindred, which rings a bell to us as we just studied in Judges 20 through 21 yesterday on day 79 of this Bible study, the preservation of Benjamin. The preservation of Benjamin was way more dysfunctional. You could go read that story. I'm not interested in talking about it again. But this story of a preservation of Judah is much different. And I suspect there's also something going on with lifting up the tribe of Judah here. Why would I say that? Well, the rest of the story can be seen as a blessing of family, mainly descendants, especially descendants in the tribe of Judah. We have here in Ruth 4:11, my first example of 9 examples. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, ancestors, who built up the house of Israel, building up a house. Third, may you produce children in Ephratham, not to be confused with Ephraim, a different place, but the place of Bethlehem, to bestow a name in Bethlehem, right, which will also become known as the city of David. 4, and through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, ancestry again. 5, may your house be like the house of Perez, to whom Tamar bore to Judah. That's right. Yet the whole dysfunction of Judah is kind of glossed over here. 6, he shall be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you is more to you than 7 sons, and she has borne him, this important ancestor figure. 7, Naomi, this symbol of tradition and heritage, acts as a nurse to the new heritage through a guy named Obed. 8, they named him Obed, and he became the father of Jesse, the father of David. The most prominent and notable character to ever come out of the tribe of Judah in this day and time. Jesus will also come later too, but to emphasize that King David's very important and that this is in fact a Judah story, what do? They repeat the genealogy of Ruth? No, King David. Thus, I would like to choose to look at the ending of the story of Ruth, and we can see that God does bless the compassionate, the loyal, and the humble. We also see how someone considered lowly has been elevated to a lasting place among nations, and especially for Ruth, she is the character who gets to pave the way for King David, and leading to the time of the United Kingdom under that famous king from the tribe of Judah, King David. So Ruth becomes enthroned as a story for her people, as a story for the Jews, and is adopted into their family. And this strong king arises from her positive characteristics, kind of following and taking after her characteristics too. Now that we have established that this is a story of Judah and that also the story of King David, we remember too that this lineage is very important for Christians because it's referenced in Matthew 1 for the lineage of Jesus. We have all of the characters involved here. And Judah, the father of Perez, right, goes on and on and on there in Matthew 1:3. Matthew 1:4 mentions the guy Nahshon, right? And Nahshon, the father of Salmon, and Salmon, the father of Boaz by Rahab, right? Through the looking at the Jericho story and continuing in that. Boaz, the father of Obed by Ruth, right? And Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. So we have, yet again, even in the Christian story, this important story of Ruth comes up and is very important as she is an ancestor not only of King David, but also of Jesus as well. But going back to my comment about raising up leaders, of being humble and loyal and compassionate, all these characteristics God calls us to be, the characteristics which we see through Jesus, and also at the same time too, that this we as people who are born not of flesh and blood, but of the Spirit, we can look at Ruth as our spiritual ancestor and remember that, in fact, God does take outsiders and bring them into God's community. So I hope you feel like you belong, that there is a place for you here as well. And I love to be connected, and I'm glad to share one of my favorite stories with you here today.